We are back and we are joined by Joshua A. Cohen, aka Ettingermentum, over at the Ettingermentum Substack. He also writes over at The Nation. Josh is in the middle of a stormy part of the country right now. I know a lot of folks are as well, so his power just went out. Thanks for joining us by phone, Josh.
Yeah, it momentarily went out. When it goes up for like a second, then it comes back on, which is generally kind of fine, but inconvenient when you're trying to do like live streaming like this.
Yeah, it's
But
not convenient, but I wanted to have you on regardless because you had two great pieces on your Substack. But let's start with the latest one. This election isn't a toss-up. For people that don't know, Josh is like both has good politics and also is really good at reading the polls. And you were accurate about there not being a red wave in 2022. You were, Josh, am I on speaker?
yeah,
Here, just take me off speaker, okay?
yeah, sure.
Yep. All right, that's better. You were right about there not being a red wave in 2022. You were right about Biden dropping out and what that would mean for the polling. And so your assessment of the race is rosier, I think, than what we're hearing in a lot of news coverage of this, which is that it's a toss-up, that this is a razor thin margin. But like, let's, I guess, start with where your map as it stands and how you feel about particularly the floor of Harris with these three Midwestern states.
Yeah, so those states have been like it's an interesting kind of ironic situation, or only kind of ironic if you if you follow this stuff really closely, because like I think like 8 years ago the kind of consensus for the future of politics would be is that like you would have Republicans who would dominate in the Midwest and you would have Democrats who would like do really well like, in the Sun Belt, and that was like the future of the country. That's the way things were headed, and there's like that did happen to some extent. We have like kind of seen some Sun Belt states that weren't competitive before, like Arizona and Georgia, come into contention. But at the same time, like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which were sort of expected by this point to be like kind of more solid for Republicans, they haven't really moved to the right as much as people really expected since 2016. They're still very, very competitive as they were like 8 years ago. And ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, you've arguably seen a shift to the left in those states, primarily because they have so many people, so many independent white secular voters who like were kind of interested in Trump and shifted towards Trump, and like more like secular people in the suburbs who were also like Republican and have now shifted to Democrats. Like there's a lot of people in those states who are both pro-choice and like more like Republican leaning, who have shifted or become less firmly Republican since Dobbs. And it's created a situation where even as other parts of the country have moved to the right, like New York or California or the Deep South, and that's kind of pushed the national popular vote to the right to a certain extent, those states have stuck with Democrats more like firmly than the rest of the country. So you saw in 2022, you had like Democrats winning by double digits in Pennsylvania and Michigan. At the same time, they were really struggling in other states like New York. And that polling, that kind of dynamic has carried over since then. It was even the case when Biden was in the race, where he was relatively somewhat competitive in those states, even as he was tanking nationally. And it gave him a very, very, very narrow path to 270 electoral votes. If he won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and like all like the safer blue states like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, he would win the electoral college 270 to 268. If you assuming he also got the Nebraska electoral vote, the one Omaha, and that was always his like the narrowest path for him. That was the only real road he had to like getting a majority, at least in my eyes, when he started tanking in the Sun Belt. And since Kamala came in, the big difference has been you've had this kind of across-the-board shift in her favor, which has really solidified her position in the Midwest to the point where you're seeing polls in Michigan, Pennsylvania. And with legitimate pollsters, it's very kind of rare at this point to see a Trump lead in those states. And at the same time, the Sun Belt is back entirely in contention. So her floor is higher and her ceiling is higher, I think, than Trump's is right now. And I think, like, a lot of the models are showing it close to 50-50, but I think that plus some other fundamentals-based stuff that I'll try to get to a bit later, I think at this point, like, you'd rather be in her position than Trump's.
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, in the fundamentals of the race, it's quite clear. It's just, you do right that she's kind of raised his floor a bit with this extremely safe
Hmm.
approach that seems like a relic from the Biden campaign, or, it's
Yeah.
still the exact same people that are running this. She kept on the entire infrastructure. It would have been a very tall task for her, given the situation, the uniqueness of the situation, for her to build a campaign team up from scratch. So it's partly like
Yeah.
it's hard to it's a chicken or the egg situation, but she's running in a very safe campaign, and it seems in keeping with the Biden strategy from before, which makes no sense to me because she can actually
Yeah.
talk. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. There's like the messaging aspects of it where it does seem kind of more geared toward winning over just moderate white voters or
Republicans. Yep.
Republican leaning. Yeah, like that aspect of it. There's a bit of an argument to be made that that kind of might help more. Like you could see, what I've found interesting is that we have seen a shift in the Midwest towards her a little bit since the debate, when she really went all in on kind of just the aesthetic of looking like a strong, capable leader, or kind of shying away from policy. At the same time, she's kind of shored up her position in states like Pennsylvania. Her polling in like states like Arizona and Georgia, to a smaller extent, there was one good poll for her yesterday, but like generally the polling here has been like a bit kind of leaning towards Trump lately. She's done a bit of a better job at solidifying like I mean, I don't even want to give her credit for like doing, because the Midwest has been leaning more Democratic for years, since before she came into the race. I think like she's just failing. She's doing a decent job at doing a poor campaign strategy. She's doing a good, in my opinion.
Right.
She's doing a good job of projecting. Like if her whole idea is just like kind of just the aesthetics of looking like a strong and capable president and nothing else, and not really committing to anything solid, and not solving the question where people don't know what the hell you will do as president. I guess she's done a good job of playing that, but it hasn't really resolved any like people's like real like kind of concerns with her. Like I don't like, because I'm trying to be a bit rosier for her, but it's just so baffling for me. I can't help but go back to it. We've consistently seen that like the biggest concern people have with her is that they don't really know how different she is from Biden, or like what she stands for, like what she believes in, or what she'd do as president. And you have her team talking to CNN just outright saying like, oh, well, people only say that they want to do, that people don't actually care about policy. They want us to go on Oprah. Like it's explicitly trying to do a substanceless campaign, except for the substance allows you to like sell out to pro crypto donors, I guess.
Right.
But like,
right.
And I think
well,
it's making
she's not emphasizing the good stuff from the substance. Like, when is the last? This is overall a positive view of how the campaign is going in terms of like the outcome. Yes, I just want to reiterate that. But like, why there's no talk about what was the stuff from a month ago about price gouging, and even her manufacturing economic pitch. Like David Dayen had a great write up about it. The stuff she emphasized and said out loud is all geared towards business leaders, and it's the most conservative elements and tax cuts. But then you read the fine print, and it's a continuation of some of the good stuff from the Biden campaign, from the Biden administration in regards to manufacturing.
Yeah, it's like she's trying to say. Usually the justification people give as to why she needs, like, politicians need to do is like, oh, it's a world of big fundraising. These are billion-dollar campaigns. Like, we have to spend all this money for. But like, she has a massive fundraising advantage. Most Democrats in the country don't really need to like they have so much money from like the small donors over the past number of cycles. We haven't really been seeing like this kind of like bending over backwards for like Mark Cuban or crypto billionaires, because they really don't have to. It speaks to like kind of a lack of imagination, like where they're just trying to it's like, I mean, this was supposed to be kind of like a more positive thing, but I think like it's kind of an issue that you have. And I think you've also seen it in New York, where if you have a certain political class that is so kind of ossified and only really gets like their like power like through intra-elite wrangling, that's really the only world they know how to understand. Like all of the people on her team, she's a VP for a guy who like beat like an establishment opponent like 16 years ago, and then took on her entire team for his administration. Like, there hasn't been the kind of shakeup that you see like at the state level, where the politicians like I would say Walz are like a lot more kind of like they practice a politics that actually makes some kind of like discernible sense.
Right. And I would hope that maybe after the campaign is over, that is incorporated into, say, the machine that she has or whatever, because she, you know, this is very different than the infrastructure that, say, Obama came in with the second time around, or what Biden had in 2020. She's a little bit more. She doesn't have the same kind of machine behind her, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and hopefully they move away from this extremely safe, do no harm strategy. But
it's not even really safe, I would say.
Well, how they perceive it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't see it in that same way. But can you explain to me why they're not polling better in the Sun Belt? Because my contention always has been Arizona and Nevada both have abortion on the ballot. In Arizona, Gallego is leading consistently with a double-digit lead.
Yeah.
Why is there that? Why is she losing in polling in Arizona, but Gallego is up by like 10, 12 points?
Yeah, this goes back to like the kind of the failure to separate her from Biden that we were just talking about. Basically, and what I was saying about the fundamentals earlier when I first got on the call, the fundamentals for like the past, basically since Dobbs for Democrats, every single indicator we get from actual voters shows that like there has been a breaking point with the current version of the GOP. Like Dobbs, I think, was kind of a straw that broke the camel's back. We have had all the special elections we've seen like since like basically 2023 show Democrats like with actual voters overperforming benchmarks from 2020, which was an election they already won. We have like the Washington primary, like which is like a sample size of 2 million people voting on basically an early general election. The results there corresponded with like a Democratic lead nationally of 4 points. That's roughly in line with what they won in 2020. You have at the Senate level, we've had these Senate Democrats who have been polling and like who aren't particularly remarkable or even incumbents. Like, I mean, I guess Alyssa Slotkin and like Gallego are fine, but they're not like world beaters or anything. They've been polling incredibly well against their Trump kind of imitator opponents like for the past 2 years. And you've seen like the big gap between Biden and them was always that like, well, Biden's seen as this failure and he's regarded differently because of his age than these people. Kamala comes in, but instead of matching that kind of baseline level of strength that these Senate Democrats and like other Democrats in special elections and in primaries have been able to manage, she has kind of split halfway, and it leaves the race in a very close position because, and what voters have said repeatedly, is that they don't know precisely how she differs from Biden, like on concrete issues. And I think it is a consequence of this campaign strategy that's not only failing to like address that, but is outright playing into it. Because like it's one thing like when you're just a new figure and people are doubtful about you, they're going to have concerns. But like when like everything she's like a lot of what she's done, I think since really she picked Walz, has been like just playing into that. She went out to Axios every single day to disavow some past position from 2019, even when they could have. Like I think Medicare for All was a really perfect place for her to look consistent and break from Biden at the same time. She like reneged on that. She reneged on all of her past positions. Her like that, there was like the line where Trump said that like, oh, her policy page is just run, spot, run because it's just platitudes. And like it's kind of true. She just has like a list of 4 things. It's just YIMBYism and child tax credits. And for a certain kind of voter, I think like a more like well-heeled, like wealthier kind of northern person where your misgivings about Biden are a bit more abstract, like they're able to sort of look past that and be like, well, I'll just see what I want in her. For I think like the lower income minority communities that we have seen Gallego outperforming Kamala with, when you don't see any difference between her and Biden and what you perceive as the policy failures of Biden are hurting you in a very concrete way that like somebody in like Oakland County, Michigan, like might not. Like her not being able to break from him is a lot more serious to you. It's like you consider that as a material issue in a way that like people who just abstractly thought Biden was weak don't.
Right.
So I think that like by trying to be so cute with how she's campaigning, she is actively alienating these people who I think otherwise would really want to like her. people want to like her.
First of all, we're getting corrections. It's Gallego. Apologies, I never took Spanish.
Yeah.
I always struggle with that one. But Druber writes in saying, ask Ettinger if he thinks Kamala is trying to help Dems win in Montana, Texas, and Florida. It seems like that's the strategy, just to push back slightly. I mean, the gun thing, I own a gun, I'm going to shoot you in my home or whatever. I mean,
it was corny. It's corny.
I know it's corny, but don't you see what they're doing at least on that front though? Like that you can at least see the strategy if that's what they're trying to do.
I get the idea, but I think that like these kind of discrete ideological positions and even like kind of aesthetic little like totems and tokens that she's laying out, I think that like that just kind of plays into this larger kind of like this. Her issue is that her issue why she was so unpopular for so long wasn't that she was old like Biden. It's because she was seen as like this empty suit who was inexperienced and people didn't really know like where she stood. And she is campaigning to a certain extent like she actually is an empty suit who doesn't believe in anything. It's
at least in recent weeks, I can hear you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
at the beginning, there was kind of a more forceful kind of approach, but they've been frozen recently. It's like, and it's a shame because like a lot of this, like she is better at giving speeches and debates than she might have in the past. Like the kind of aesthetic is there, but the content that could make people who really like do have sincere material problems with this administration, like who I think would otherwise really want to vote for her against Trump, she's just like, it's her campaign strategy. It is their explicit philosophy not to provide that. And I mean, it'll probably work out, but like it does not need to be this hard.
Right, exactly. I think that's the point, is that at the end of the day, the picture is still pretty good, but we could be increasing things along the margins. Like, I mean, so North Carolina, Mark Robinson obviously is a huge boost to Democrats there. I think she's going to win North Carolina, but which is interesting because Carrie Lake doesn't seem to be having the same effect for her in Arizona, right? But North Carolina is definitely in play and continuously trending in the Democrats' direction. What's your sense of the race there?
Yeah. I think it's the reason why I can really believe her doing better in North Carolina than here in Georgia or Arizona is the demographic thing. North Carolina is the whitest of all of the Sun Belt states. It's more similar to Michigan and Pennsylvania than it is. It's more similar to Georgia, but like it's more in line with those demographics. I think it's about 10% more white. So that gives her, since her numbers with the whites have generally been pretty strong, that gives her a bit more of a floor. The Robinson thing, people like really do disagree with that. People like try to act smart about it and say he won't matter. Like, I mean, I guess like historically the idea of reverse coattails, there's not a ton of evidence for it. But at this point, you're really pushing that concept to its breaking point. Like those types of like scandals do drive turnout. Like there will be like kind of a sense of urgency among voters who might otherwise be sort of alienated in this race about like Trump, who's a very known quantity, and Kamala, who's only break-even favorables. In North Carolina, there will be like kind of that will drive people, I think, to vote to the same extent that like an abortion referendum might be able to in a different state. I can really believe that, and I think it really does matter because everybody talks like all the time about Pennsylvania, which is 19 electoral votes. But she could lose Pennsylvania, and that she might necessarily not lose the election if she wins North Carolina and Nevada or North Carolina and Georgia. That'll be enough to kind of sub in for that one state. I think North Carolina and Georgia can make it for both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I don't have like the math right out in front of me, but like this southeastern part of the country, which I think a lot of people are taking granted, like, or kind of assuming Trump will win, is a very, very real threat for him because that's 32 electoral votes between like us and North Carolina.
And Georgia, I mean, this Fox poll that came out this morning where she's winning, it seems like a bit of an outlier, but we also know that Democrats have been able to have a good ground game in Georgia. So that's also a question here.
I can believe it living here. I think one thing with Georgia that a lot of people don't understand, like once we do early voting, you can actually get a good sense of what the results will be here because we don't track voters by party registration, but we do track them by race for some reason. So you can actually get a good sense of what the racial demographics of here will, like the state will be, like for a number of weeks heading into election day. And if black turnout, I think the rule in Georgia is if black turnout is at 30% and the white Democrats get 30% of the white vote, they win statewide. And I could see Kamala hitting both of those benchmarks. I think that the kind of underappreciated sort of upside for her is she's the first black candidate at a national level since Obama in 2012, and just a small boost in black turnout for that reason could substantially impact the results here.
And New York, you mentioned this earlier. You've adjusted your assessment of how much the Democrats need to win the popular vote by in terms of how that would be reflective in the Electoral College to win the election. I feel like in the past it had been around 3 points, that or 2 to 3 points had been the consensus.
It was 2 points. It was roughly 2.5 points in 2016. It was 3.5 points in 2020. People expected it to get worse this year for Democrats. They'd have to win by 4 or 5, which would be a very tall order. That is not easy. But Democrats have kind of shed a lot of votes in New York, California, and also in the rural Deep South, like is kind of another overlooked version of that. Their numbers there have gotten pretty rough in recent years because the people don't really care about abortion at all. But a lot of the polling in New York shows Kamala only leading by like 10 to 14 points, which is enough to win the state. But Biden, I think, in 2021 by like 27. So it's like a significantly reduced margin.
And that's Kathy Hochul having minus 20 favorability per the last Siena New York Times poll.
She's less popular than Trump in New York.
And oh my God! And then the Eric Adams thing is going to also affect Democrats too, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much it'll help, how much it'll hurt, but it certainly can't help them.
Yeah, it certainly can't. So that's, I think, maybe why you adjust a little bit of the national total in terms of assessing the Democrats' chances. Okay, lastly, before we get to your polling guide, the Texas and Florida Senate races. Colin Allred seems to be gaining some momentum in Texas. What is your view of how those races can go? And are the Democrats being smart in putting resources into those races? I saw that I think Bernie Sanders and AOC are going down there to stump for Allred, which is interesting because Bernie Sanders still has pretty high favorables with Latino voters.
The last Democrat.
Yeah.
Bernie's always been very popular with, not always, but since 2020, he's done very well with Latinos. I think there was a study that showed that like a lot of the Latinos who voted for him in 2020 went on to vote for Trump later on that year. You could predict pretty strongly like how much of a shift like in the Rio Grande Valley there would be between like Clinton and Biden shifting to Trump between 2016 and 2020. You could track that pretty closely by how well Bernie did in the primary that year. So I think he has a real appeal in that area. AOC obviously is like a political celebrity and will like always get a lot of people paying attention. Cruz is a very interesting figure, and I think he makes this like a very interesting race because he's a unique incumbent who is so kind of unpopular and noxious that he consistently underperforms his own party. And in Texas, you have another case where even if the demographics aren't the same as in the Midwest, you have such hardline Republican policies at the state level that has kept, I think, the Democratic base very mobilized to an extent that isn't true in California or New York, even though they're both, like all three states are very non-white. So the polling there hasn't been horrifically bad for Kamala. Her numbers look pretty similar to what Biden's are. Allred is outrunning her by like 2 or 3 points, which is enough to put him in the margin of error in some polls. It probably, like the way things are going now, if everything matches the polls exactly, he'll probably lose like relatively narrowly. But if there's a shift in favor of Democrats at the last minute, which like might be possible, or if they're being undercounted in the polls, which like we can only really guess at this point if that might be happening, though there are some theories you could have as to why they might be, he could probably come out ahead. There was one poll that had him leading by a point, which is the first time I think we've seen that, like I think since 2018 with Beto. So like Florida, I don't really like. I just kind of write off. Well, I don't like expect anything from Florida.
Do the cannabis and abortion ballot measures play any role in Florida? I mean, it's a 60% threshold, but yeah.
We've historically seen Florida consistently vote for more left-wing like ballot measures while also voting for Republicans at the state level, like without much of a problem. their threshold for cognitive dissonance is very high.
And the threshold for the complete malfeasance of the Democrats in Florida and their incompetence is probably a better word for it.
Yeah.
Should not be overstated. They're horrible.
Oh God, yeah, they're barely functional.
Yeah.
It does suck. The one time they got like a progressive nominee there for like the first time, just like Claude Pepper. He was the most corrupt man alive.
Right, exactly. We'll end this part, and I just want to read how your piece started here about this election isn't a toss-up. With the exception of the VP debate in early October, which if history is any indication won't have any impact on the election at all, there are no set major events to get to between now and November. The tickets have been confirmed, the conventions have been held, the debates have been debated, and Trump's trials and sentencings have been delayed and postponed, absent possible developments overseas, which I will go over later in this article. All we have left to watch going forward are the polls, which are now more important than ever before. Essentially, you later in the piece, you talk about if an all-out war breaks out in the Middle East, that's a potential wild card here. Right now, Israel is bombing Beirut.
Yep, carpet bombing.
So as we speak, this is a possibility. First give us the assessment of the race as it stands if nothing changes, and then all-out war and how that could affect the election.
Yeah, so the big problem, and this is sort of like, this is both, like, so as it stands, I think if you go off of stuff like the Washington primary and the special elections, and you assume that Kamala will mostly be able to, like, kind of perform in line with a generic Democrat, which is not a total guarantee, but, like, probably should happen. I mean, like, she could have made it easier on herself, but she didn't, and we'll see how that goes. She probably will, like, I think she is, is the favorite in the Midwest. Those states all vote pretty closely together. Just those alone will be enough for her to win. North Carolina, Georgia, and I think I would say are like kind of the more fruitful opportunities for her. The Southwest, because Latino voting has been like so bad for Democrats like in recent years, I'm a little more skeptical of. Nevada, the polling has been pretty decent for her, but I am a little wary about that state. Like I know like what the history is, and Democrats always kind of come back there, and it doesn't look bad now. But like just the demographics just look so kind of like not very promising for them. She has enough she has like her base in the Midwest is kind of solidified to the extent that Trump's base in the Sun Belt is not, and she only needs her base in the Midwest to win. So I think I would like have her as kind of like, I'd rather be in her position than Trump's right now. I think she's in a more solid place. A war breaking out, on one hand, it won't really do much to change how people regard Biden's foreign policy record, and hers as an extension of that. Biden has his foreign policy record, contrary to all of his fucking like whining about AUKUS, it could have convinced you otherwise. His foreign policy record has been one of his worst issues. People think he's been a failure in that regard. Trump has been favored on foreign policy since they started polling this race. It's one of his biggest strengths. There was like a poll, I think, this just goes so contrary to how like the Kamala people have been campaigning. Her second best issue was trans issues. It was tied with abortion as her second best issue. Like this was a Fox poll, and her second worst issue was Israel Hamas. People consider her and Biden to be completely inept on this. I think she had a perfect opportunity to distance herself from him on that, as much like Hubert Humphrey did in 1968, and that benefited him tremendously at the end of the campaign. But she has not done that. She has hugged very closely to Biden. She gave a full day for him during the DNC. So she will be connected to what he does. That is her own choice. She has made the decision to stick by him. So any increase in salience to what is already, what some polling averages have shown to be Biden's single worst issue. He has, I think, the Real Clear Politics average had him below 30% on Israel-Palestine approval. That's worse than his numbers on immigration and the economy. Just, you cannot get much worse than here. People think he's been a complete disaster. I don't think his numbers can get any worse than that. The past below 30%, you're getting like Watergate levels where people are just supporting you because like they're Democrats and they're not ever going to say you do anything wrong. All-out war could maybe raise the salience of that in a way that hurts her. But at the same time, you can only go so low on how much like people think you fail with a certain like issue. And I don't know like to what extent Americans even really know what Lebanon is, like to really make a big judgment on it. They'll probably just like kind of in their minds just understand that there's another Biden foreign policy flop and just judge it the same way they've judged it for the past year, which is that he's been a complete disgrace.
Well, you mentioned trans issues in the sense of like that does when issues poll in a particular way, the second question has to be, does that poll translate to how people vote? Like the economy, it's very clear that that is what translates into people voting. The thing that an all-out war would do in terms of increasing the salience for people in the country is that would mean that the United States is involved, right, in some ground operation, and that would be a disaster, obviously.
Oh, if U.S. troops are getting directly involved in it, that would be seen as a complete failure far beyond what has even occurred so far. And I think that could very meaningfully hurt Kamala's chances if she doesn't use it as an opportunity to break from Biden.
Okay.
It would really be a do or die moment for her.
Yep. But as you say, the dynamics are so locked in at this point, 5 weeks out, that would be very difficult, I think, to make that pivot because she hasn't done so already. But
no, that's been done in the past.
Right.
Hubert Humphrey called for a bombing halt in October in 1968.
But he lost.
And that worked.
He lost.
But it swung it around for him. Like he gained a lot of points. September 30th, indeed, in fact,
that was the date?
Was the date that he did the speech.
Yeah, he was down like 20 points.
He gained a lot of momentum after that. He only
lost by 1.
Yeah. No, I agree that it would be the right move, right? It's just, she
should do it, and she's not going to, and
right.
That's going to be a failure. So hopefully she can limp over the finish line failing like that.
Yeah. All right, let's turn to your guide to pollsters, because I think this is very helpful for people. You have been quick to point out this dynamic here that I'll read this part of the beginning of your piece. While past elections usually only saw one or two well-known firms with systemic Republican slants, the Biden era has seen a rise of a huge number of such pollsters who often put out just as much, if not more, data than nonpartisan firms. Can you talk about this new dynamic in polling and these Republican slanted firms kind of cropping up and being included in things like Nate Silver's average, for example?
Yeah, I think this is an instance where the kind of institutional sort of people who follow this, who have been doing this like since like the 2000s or even earlier than that, are not really kind of adjusting as much to new reality. The presumption, like the kind of game theory sort of logic for why Nate Silver would always include everybody and everybody into his models was that like every firm has their primary incentive is to be as correct as possible so they can make more money and get more clients. So we shouldn't assume anything about their motivations other than that they want to like have the most accurate numbers possible. Like that was just like the rule that he had. Anything other than that would just be unfair discrimination. And I think like in 2012, that was probably a fair thing to say. I don't think that's what things look like now in an era of widespread election denial and extreme polarization, where like it's a lot less, there's a lot less of an incentive to like try to be the number one rated pollster in the New York Times, like polling metric rating system or whatever like they have, or like 538's rating system. That's a lot less of like, that's a lot less lucrative than to just have the best numbers for Trump as much as possible so you can be put on Fox News to talk about why Trump is winning. This was already dynamic for like years. I think like in the late 2000s during the Tea Party, they would have Scott Rasmussen, who would repeatedly go on Fox to say how his polls vindicated like Republican Party talking points. And this has become a whole industry in the era of Trump where you have these entire pollsters whose whole purpose is to fashion results that show results and often like shifts that just fit entirely in line with Republican talking points. People become huge celebrities off of doing this. They like get constant like appearances on like TV and on radio off of having these results that go a certain way. So we're at a point for half of the political world, the incentive is not to have the most accurate results. It's to have the most like pro-Trump results. And in 2022, we saw this happening constantly where it wouldn't just be the very well-known, the people who were well-known for giving pro-Republican results, like gave very extreme numbers for them. There were like, I think Trafalgar had one race in Vermont they said was within single digits, and they were off by 30 points on that. But there were also like a lot of smaller firms that were popping up with similar numbers that were also trying to get like a lot of attention. Not only were these like professional outlets, a lot of these were just run by like there was one firm that was just run by 2 high school teenagers.
Can you sorry to cut you off, Josh, but like you have a group you categorize these in your piece. Again, people should be subscribing to your Substack. This is this section called "The Firms Run by Teenagers and/or Right-Wing Twitter Accounts." Talk about this new dynamic, as you were about to get into, but these other right-wing pollsters that are run by literal teenagers.
Yeah, so the first one of this was like a very kind of memorable moment. If you ever follow elections on Twitter, it was the Pennsylvania race with Oz and Fetterman, and there was like Fetterman started off with these really, really big double-digit leads, and then it started kind of falling a little bit as like he wasn't able to campaign, and his polarization kind of kicked in at the end. And people like thought that his odds were plummeting, and there was always a question like, who will be the first pollster to show Dr. Oz ahead? And then like in early October, there was a pollster that showed Dr. Oz ahead. It was called Patriot Polling. It was run by 2 like actual teenagers in a high school, like I don't know, like a high school somewhere. And it said Dr. Oz was leading. Everybody thought this was like the biggest joke like they've ever seen. But then like the same day, Nate Silver included Patriot Polling in his model. Like this firm with no track record, run by like self-admittedly run by high schoolers, he puts their data in there like at the same like right next to like every other pollster who's like that's run by actual professionals. That's sort of an extreme example, like where it's just obviously kind of like a joke. I thought like there was no explanation for that. He was deliberately trying to like shift like the margins in favor of Republicans, but. He included them. He included several firms like that are run by adults, but like are controlled by like election deniers, like that just like
SoCal, Qantas News. Yeah. Those are the ones that you list there, right?
Yeah, those are new ones. Those are not run by. They could be run by adults. They are run by. They have started this year, and they are run by right-wing Twitter accounts. SoCal is actually, I thought, was a bit of like kind of a gallant to the goofuses of this sort of thing, because he does try to make himself look legitimate, even though he is like a right-wing like Twitter account guy who's like fake DMs to like in feuds with like liberal Twitter people. Like, but he like, and then Qantas he does the same thing as him. They basically just they do like the cheapest possible surveys on these like AI like polling survey like software companies, and they don't actually have much control over their own results besides weighting, which can be pretty significant. But like they have been included too. SoCal polling is in the 538 average. Qantas polling is in the 538 average. Qantas polling was like on Twitter literally bragged about moving like an average towards Republicans once, and like 538 just like they sent one guy to call him. They just said, "Oh, sorry, my bad. That's not what I meant." And then it also got revealed that he failed to disclose funding from like far right companies for his polling, like far right organizations. And he also like just said, "Oh, my bad," and they haven't gotten rid of him on the site. The kind of threshold for like just keeping these people like on these very big agenda setting like aggregators that like influence campaign decisions and drive coverage, there is basically no quality control for this. They see it as like impossible to like make any judgments beyond just like what the numbers say, and including these people, like even when they're like they have no experience or no background or no like professional track record on any of this, or like in the case of Trafalgar or Rasmussen, they're run by like people who deny elections. I think Rasmussen polling is like denied the Holocaust. Like it is like there is no floodgates for this sort of stuff, and it's making this should not be a difficult issue to deal with. But like, if you're just a layperson following this, like you have no idea what the backgrounds for any of these things are.
You mentioned Rasmussen.
I think it's a terrible mistake.
Yeah, those are the junk, teenager-run ridiculous ones, SoCal, Qantas, and then notoriously Patriot Polling. Those are newer, and that speaks to this dynamic of these right-wing groups seemingly funding these, in some instances, these right-wing leaning pollsters that are getting aggregated and into models like the one that Nate Silver is a part of. We should say that he's now part of Polymarket, which I guess is a crypto Peter Thiel backed thing.
I will say that hasn't changed any of his decision making. He is still making all of the same editorial decisions he's always made for his model. I don't agree with them, but he hasn't shifted his philosophy in favor of them or anything. And his model actually shows very better numbers for Kamala now than it ever has before. I think she's up to 58% on there.
Yeah,
but,
it's just something to note.
I would not be involved in a political betting market. I think that is
as a pollster aggregator. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't bet on politics, and I'm just a guy who writes about them. But I don't want to give off the impression that I'm trying to make money off of what I write. I would never do that. I don't get why people are so lax about that.
Because you could be writing, but Josh, you could be writing things to move the market in another direction, so you could get better odds on betting on the outcome that you actually think is going to happen. That's how this works.
Yeah, I mean that's obvious to me. It's not obvious to other people. But I will say I do not bet on politics, and I never will. I think that's a very basic thing for me to sacrifice in order to do what I do.
Same here, and I enjoy gambling on sports, but I've never bet on politics.
Yeah.
So Rasmussen, you mentioned, they've been along for a while. You write here, it's denied everything from the 2020 election to vaccine safety to the Holocaust, but they have some respectability and is often cited by Trump. The others that you should look out for
all the time
are the Trafalgar Group, McLaughlin and Associates, Harvard Harris, no association to Kamala Harris. They're the ones that are run by. That's the Zionist one, right?
Yeah, it is a Zionist one that has the push pull stuff that AIPAC cites. Mark Penn is the former Clinton advisor who was a consultant for Trump during his presidency.
By the way, some Clinton to Trump pipeline, if you want to include Alan Dershowitz in there.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother bag. Mm-hmm. Insider Advantage is the other one that leans right. If you could just tell people a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, Insider Advantage, I know them very well because they're another, Trafalgar is also based in Atlanta. Insider Trading, or as I like to call them, is based in Atlanta. Insider Disadvantage is run by a former Republican member of the Georgia State House of Representatives. He's very close friends with Robert Kahale, who is the guy who runs Trafalgar, who is basically there's a good article about this from 2 years ago, but basically the guy kind of just chooses the results of his polls ahead of time. He takes his own samples for each poll, and basically just his results aren't even really results; they're just kind of guesswork. Basically, it's really they're the ultimate disregard. But Towery is really close with Kahale. They run a podcast together, which is kind of cute. I do like that. I'm happy for them. And he goes on Fox News a lot. He's one of these I call them Fox News merchants because they're always on the Ingram or whatever to talk about how their polling numbers are good for Trump. And he also does deny the 2020 election results and says Democrats are doing fraud. So you can kind of see where his preferences are dialed towards propping up that narrative as opposed to getting the most accurate results to what the certified results are.
And I'll let you go in a second, Josh, but there are polls that have more succinct and transparent methodologies that are Democratic leaning, Morning Consult leans a little bit Democrat in their results. But what should people?
They're not run by Democratic.
Right, but right, exactly. Yeah. Go on.
They just have certain methodologies that have been decent for Democrats. I will say about Morning Consult, they gave Biden consistently pretty bad numbers when he was in the race. They just happen to be pretty good for Kamala now. I wouldn't really disregard them, although they aren't really the kind of A standard stuff. They are a tracker poll, and tracker polls aren't really as good for the precise numbers.
And so who are the polls that you say people should trust the most to look out for and not get? I mean, you can look at the ratings, but for you in this election cycle, which are the pollsters that have been the most accurate and transparent?
Yeah, well, I was really impressed by Marist in 2022. They put out results right before the Senate races that year that were very accurate. They got the Pennsylvania race very closely, the Georgia race very closely, and the Arizona race very closely that year. They had a set of surveys that had very close tied races basically in the Sun Belt, and Kamala leads in the Midwest, which fit very closely with my priors. So I think that they are once again correct. But the New York Times has been a bit weird this year. They've had some like more pro-Trump numbers consistently than other firms. I think even to the point where the guy who runs Rasmussen was like, oh, yeah, these guys are oversampling Trump supporters, which I thought was like funny because I've never seen anybody in that world say that before. But they were very like accurate in 2022, so accurate they doubted their own results. But like, I mean, I'd always like, I'm not so certain about them. I think the results are a little bit hard to square with the other stuff we've seen this year, but they're pretty good. Let me think what else. Like state level, like native state pollsters. I know there's a guy, Joshua Smithy in Pennsylvania, and he always like says to keep track of state level pollsters in that state. I mean, I can't think of much else on the top of my head, but
sure.
Like the A+ pollsters on the sites are usually pretty reliable.
Washington Post Ipsos, ABC Ipsos, that kind of deal. Yeah, they've been pretty consistently good. All right, well, I think that gives people a good guide. I wanted, there's a lot of like...
Yeah, like the NBC, ABC, Washington Post, like big name firms are usually pretty good. If Reuters, Ipsos does shit for everybody, they can be kind of weird sometimes. But like they're not like objectively terrible or anything.
It's just good for people to have this information because the poll denialism is something that, I mean, you and I have talked about this, is frustrating, but it's aided and abetted by these Republican junk polls that are shifting the averages.
The institutional aggregators who refuse to provide context.
And that's just not, there's no equivalent on the left or on the Democratic side. There really isn't.
There should, if somebody wants to make a lot of money, they probably could do this. Like people always say, oh, why don't Democrats do this? Why don't they have their fake pollsters? This shows a lack of confidence. That it only shows people who are not on the ball in terms of like being able to make a lot of money. If you like created a polling firm called like Lepanto Strategies or like Blue Wave Polling or whatever, and you put out shit showing Kamala up in Florida, you would be on MSNBC News within a week. Like you would like get so much attention. You would, but you know, I mean, I like Democrats taking it to the Republicans on that front, but I don't even know what the value is. It just feels like Republican pollsters are doing this for those people who get money. No,
for them to. I don't care about them getting money, Josh.
People. Yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't provide value to like the world.
Okay.
But like this is just my advice to somebody who wants to grift.
Yes, thank you for that. I really appreciate that advice. Thanks so much.
Subscribe to Ettingermentum for a kickback.
Yeah, exactly. Ettingermentum.news. You are one of my favorite writers, particularly on electoral politics. So appreciate all of that and support Ettingermentum over at his Substack. Thanks for calling in, and hope you're safe down in Georgia, even though I know it's some stormy weather.
Miranda says hi.
Hi, Miranda. Good to viewers may remember, called in to talk about the polio epidemic in Gaza with her set of expertise. So really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Josh. Have a good rest of your day. All right.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on as always.
For sure.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.